Hi, my name is Susie. I'm an activist and a journalist from Auckland, New Zealand. For years, I've worked on controversial issues like the corruption of our intelligence agencies. I was severely targeted as a result of my work. This led to my articles being amplified by the world's most accomplished publisher. In 2016, I made a documentary about how and why I was forced to leave my country. I have now sought refuge in Russia, and my situation has become public.
On 882 6PR, the voice of Perth.
It's 12:30 right now, and Tony with you, and I'm really happy we finally got through to Moscow to my friend over there, Susie Dawson.
You're listening to a 95BFM podcast.
Susie Dawson is a Kiwi activist and journalist who worked as a member of Occupy Auckland's media team at that time. Now, 5 years later, and following involvement in GCSB and TPPA opposition, she's seeking asylum in Russia, alleging she has been spied on, harassed and threatened by the police.
Welcome back to The Wire. Now, finally on the show today, last week it was announced that Susie Dawson will be the new leader of the Internet Party.
Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. We have a special guest with us. It's Susie Dawson. She's an activist, journalist, former party leader, and current president of the Internet Party.
Susie Dawson, an activist and citizen journalist currently seeking asylum in Moscow. Susie has written extensively on surveillance and the deep state and claims it's not safe for her in New Zealand.
My name is Craig Tuck. I'm a lawyer from New Zealand. I act in the area of international human rights. I act for Susie Dawson, along with a group of other lawyers throughout the world who act for journalists and dissenters in high-profile cases, including the case of Julian Assange. As far back as 2012, Susie has been trying to warn New Zealanders and other citizens around the world about state targeting and surveillance of citizens and the methods being used to do it.
Surveillance in New Zealand is now so widespread, it's not an issue of police going and getting a warrant and doing an investigation and then it all coming out in court. The vast majority of the surveillance that's undertaken is never going to be aired in a courtroom. And by that I'm talking about cell phone technologies. I'm talking about lawful interception is the term that the companies that do this like to use. There is a corporation in Wellington, New Zealand called SSI Corp. And you can Google them and you can look at their website. And on their website, they're so good as to explain at length exactly what they do and how legal it is for them to do it. And essentially, they can intercept virtually any communication. If they have someone at range, they can hear your actual conversations, but also through cell phones, they can essentially turn them into microphones and hear any conversation that's had within vicinity. They can see your text messages, they can see what photos are on your phone, they can see what files are on your phone, they can read your emails, they can just intercept all kinds of information.
Any intelligence service in the world that has significant funding and a real technological research team can own that phone the minute it connects to their network. As soon as you turn it on, it can be theirs. They can turn it into a microphone, they can take pictures from it, they can take the data off of it. But it's important to understand that these things are typically done on a targeted basis.
Not only was Susie essentially blowing a whistle on state-level spying, she was naming the precise entities that years later it would be proven had in fact been doing it.
And the fact that these are private corporations that are doing it should be really concerning to us. The crowd that they outsourced it to was TCIL, which was, I believe, Thompson and Clark Investigations Limited. The state is contracting a private company to surveil you. To me, that's really immoral, absolutely immoral.
Some 6 years later, in December 2018, an official State Services Commission report confirmed that New Zealand government agencies had been employing Thompson and Clark Investigations Limited to target New Zealand citizens. This is a private company that had essentially been instructed by state agencies and departments to spy on citizens.
More than than a dozen police staff are under investigation for passing sensitive information to the private investigators Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark. Security firm Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark.
So Thompson and Clark, aren't some of them old police officers?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so does that explain the relationship and the free flow of information? Doesn't it actually seem a bit crass?
Well, at the end of the day, I guess what I trust is people's intent.
The report identifies perhaps inappropriately close relationships, morning teas paid for by Thompson and Clark, invitations to go out for drinks. Were there other companies identified where you inappropriately gave them information, or just Thompson and Clark?
There are a myriad of security companies who inquire of police every day. For instance, insurance security.
But that's not my question. People listening to this will think, hey, Thompson and Clark were getting stellar, top shelf, gold star treatment from the police. Why? Do you treat other security firms the same as you were treating this one? How do you seriously think it looks to members of the public listening to this?
Thompson and Clark hasn't just been paid by the government to spy on Greenpeace and earthquake claimants in Christchurch. Tonight, Checkpoint can reveal the controversial security firm has been also monitoring the activities of another 3 activist groups in Northland, Coromandel and Wellington, and the activities of at least 1 further claimant.
Susie has been involved at the very highest levels, with people facing charges from prosecutions coming out of the Eastern District Court of Virginia in the United States. There are more prosecutions to follow of currently unnamed persons. Importantly, information will be coming out in the months to come that will provide transparency and clarity and lead to accountability. Suppression and prosecution of dissenters can't be allowed in New Zealand or elsewhere. That's why Susie's team is launching the hashtag 1versus5i campaign, and with your help can achieve some important victories for democracy and for each and every one of us.
Susie.
Hi, my name is Susie. I'm an activist and a journalist from Auckland, New Zealand. For years, I've worked on controversial issues like the corruption of our intelligence agencies. I was severely targeted as a result of my work. This led to my articles being amplified by the world's most accomplished publisher. In 2016, I made a documentary about how and why I was forced to leave my country. I have now sought refuge in Russia, and my situation has become public.
On 882 6PR, the voice of Perth.
It's 12:30 right now, and Tony with you, and I'm really happy we finally got through to Moscow to my friend over there, Susie Dawson.
You're listening to a 95BFM podcast.
Susie Dawson is a Kiwi activist and journalist who worked as a member of Occupy Auckland's media team at that time. Now, 5 years later, and following involvement in GCSB and TPPA opposition, she's seeking asylum in Russia, alleging she has been spied on, harassed and threatened by the police.
Welcome back to The Wire. Now, finally on the show today, last week it was announced that Susie Dawson will be the new leader of the Internet Party.
Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. We have a special guest with us. It's Susie Dawson. She's an activist, journalist, former party leader, and current president of the Internet Party.
Susie Dawson, an activist and citizen journalist currently seeking asylum in Moscow. Susie has written extensively on surveillance and the deep state and claims it's not safe for her in New Zealand.
My name is Craig Tuck. I'm a lawyer from New Zealand. I act in the area of international human rights. I act for Susie Dawson, along with a group of other lawyers throughout the world who act for journalists and dissenters in high-profile cases, including the case of Julian Assange. As far back as 2012, Susie has been trying to warn New Zealanders and other citizens around the world about state targeting and surveillance of citizens and the methods being used to do it.
Surveillance in New Zealand is now so widespread, it's not an issue of police going and getting a warrant and doing an investigation and then it all coming out in court. The vast majority of the surveillance that's undertaken is never going to be aired in a courtroom. And by that I'm talking about cell phone technologies, I'm talking about lawful interception is the term that the companies that do this like to use. There is a corporation in Wellington, New Zealand called SSI Corp, and you can Google them and you can look at their website. And on their website, they're so good as to explain at length exactly what they do and how legal it is for them to do it. And essentially, they can intercept virtually any communication. If they have someone at range, they can hear your actual conversations, but also through cell phones, they can essentially turn them into microphones and hear any conversation that's had within vicinity. They can see your text messages, they can see what photos are on your phone, they can see what files are on your phone, they can read your emails, they can just intercept all kinds of information.
Any intelligence service in the world that has significant funding and a real technological research team can own that phone the minute it connects to their network. As soon as you turn it on, it can be theirs. They can turn it into a microphone, they can take pictures from it, they can take the data off of it. But it's important to understand that these things are typically done on a targeted basis.
Not only was Susie essentially blowing a whistle on state-level spying, she was naming the precise entities that years later it would be proven had in fact been doing it.
And the fact that these are private corporations that are doing it should be really concerning to us. The crowd that they outsourced it to was TCIL, which was, I believe, Thompson and Clark Investigations Limited. The state is contracting a private company to surveil you. To me, that's really immoral, absolutely immoral.
Some 6 years later, in December 2018, an official State Services Commission report confirmed that New Zealand government agencies had been employing Thompson and Clark Investigations Limited to target New Zealand citizens. This is a private company that had essentially been instructed by state agencies and departments to spy on citizens.
More than a dozen police staff are under investigation for passing sensitive information to the private investigators Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark. Security firm Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark.
Thompson and Clark.
So Thompson and Clark, aren't some of them old police officers?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so does that explain the relationship and the free flow of information? Doesn't it actually seem a bit crass?
Well, at the end of the day, I guess what I trust is people's intent.
The report identifies perhaps inappropriately close relationships, morning teas paid for by Thompson and Clark, invitations to go out for drinks. Were there other companies identified where you inappropriately gave them information, or just Thompson and Clark?
There are a myriad of security companies who inquire of police every day. For instance, insurance security.
But that's not my question. People listening to this will think, hey, Thompson and Clark were getting stellar, top shelf, gold star treatment from the police. Why? Do you treat other security firms the same as you were treating this one? Yeah. How do you seriously think it looks to members of the public listening to this?
Thompson and Clark hasn't just been paid by the government to spy on Greenpeace and earthquake claimants in Christchurch. Tonight, Checkpoint can reveal the controversial security firm has been also monitoring the activities of another 3 activist groups in Northland, Coromandel and Wellington, and the activities of at least 1 further claimant.
Susie has been involved at the very highest levels, with people facing charges from prosecutions coming out of the Eastern District Court of Virginia in the United States. There are more prosecutions to follow of currently unnamed persons. Importantly, information will be coming out in the months to come that will provide transparency and clarity and lead to accountability. Suppression and prosecution of dissenters can't be allowed in New Zealand or elsewhere. That's why Susie's team is launching the hashtag #OneVersus5I campaign, and with your help can achieve some important victories for democracy and for each and every one of us.
Susie, I just want to say a couple things more relevant here. I admire very much what you're doing and have done under considerable duress. Again, I think we have to give credit where it's due. You were allowed to live in peace and to do these things, even though I suppose the Russians would just as much prefer you go away. They haven't sent you away. That's big, okay? Now, Christine Assange, Julian's mother, wrote a wonderful letter for you. I don't know if many of the people watching tonight know about it, but I copied down a little phrase here. It says, Susie is a courageous person of scrupulous integrity and honesty. Well, yeah, that's who you are. And that's why you're.
You have a knack for making me want to cry, honestly, Ray.
Well, you know, Christine says that. You know, Christine believes what she says. Now, the other thing, of course, is that the so-called Official State Services Commission of New Zealand has confirmed what you've been charging all along, and that is that the government has been engaging spies to target members of political parties like you all along. I mean, hello, that's an official statement from the New Zealand government, and it's been published. Nobody knows this, but heck, that speaks volumes in terms of your asylum appeal. And I suggest that, you know, that should be kept front and center.
Let's look at your case. You have done literally nothing wrong. You have played by the rules. You've been vindicated, not just in the court of public opinion, but in the New Zealand press. You've been vindicated. Your problem is that people don't like your politics. And people don't like Julian's politics, and they're determined to take that out on you. But your strength is that you know that. Your strength is that you really do have the law on your side. And maybe this actually can be about justice. I think that the key here, Susie, is to get it all into the light. Because the reason the US government chooses the Eastern District of Virginia is because the Eastern District is home to the CIA, it's home to the Pentagon, it's home to probably 80+% of all intelligence community contractors, and they don't want anything in the light in the Eastern District of Virginia. It's no accident that the chief judge in EDVA is the former chief judge of the FISA court. It's also no accident that Judge Leonie Brinkema, who reserves almost every national security case for herself, is a former prosecutor in the Justice Department's National Security Division. So the key is to get all of it into the light. The key is to try to influence a jury pool. The key is to try to influence those reporters who cover national security issues, or in this case, issues of transparency and freedom of the press. Call me a fool, but I think it can be won.
Susie really is in a position that is just coming down to pure survival. And that's actually the nature of the beast, is that most of these elite organizations simply can take people out through lawfare or through simply just starving them out and weakening somebody by basically removing all of their ability to function in the world. I have spoken a great deal to Susie over the last year, really, addressing all of her quite understandable, emotional, physical, trauma stuff that happens to people who put themselves on the line. And what I really want to just look at is the myth that activists or journalists are just putting themselves in harm's way to somehow make them look ridiculous, when in fact what they really are is just like the kind of person that drives down the street, sees a dog wandering around in traffic, pulls over and gets the dog in the car. They're just somebody who goes, oh shit, something bad is happening, I better go sort it out. And what people like Susie, who was a mum in the suburbs, that was she had a job, she noticed something was going wrong. She noticed the equivalent of a dog walking in the middle of the street about to get run over. And she tried to do something about it. And that's what Julian did. Julian saw things that he felt he could do something about. Susie saw things she thought she could do something about. John Kiriakou saw something and felt he had to do something. Craig Tuck, Ray McGovern, all of these people have looked and seen the equivalent of a dog about to get run over, except we're talking about mankind getting run over.
Hello, I'm Susie Dawson, an activist and a journalist, and this is my channel. And we're going to talk today about the Five Eyes from a Kiwi in Moscow.
Graham, what the fuck are you doing in my chair?
I'm sorry, what was that? I was just talking to some friends.
What are you doing in my chair?
I didn't know you had a thing going on. I don't know, I just saw this on live and I just decided to talk.
Fucking Americans. Hi, everybody. As you may have heard, my name is Susie Dawson. I'm an activist and a journalist from Auckland, New Zealand. Welcome to my stream. Sorry about that intruder. But this is going to be a pretty serious stream. And we thought we'd kick it off with a little bit of levity. Bear with me a minute. I'm just going to check that you can all hear me in chat. Hi, everyone. If you can hear me all right, say hi. No, this was not recorded. It's live. Hey. So, sorry about that unceremonious interruption from a house guest. Yeah, he does have to work on his Kiwi accent. I totally agree. Okay, everybody, I know this is a long-awaited stream for a lot of you, and it is for me, and I've been putting a bit of work into it this week. And in doing so, it's become really clear to me that there is so much to talk about on this topic. There is so much information that I want to pass on to you. And so I've had a chat to a few of my friends who are also interested in similar issues. And we've decided that we're going to make this a series of live streams. And we'll be doing it every single Sunday night going forward. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to take you through a really high-level overview, a presentation that I've put together about what the global network of intelligence agencies is and how they operate. And then each week going forward, we're going to examine specific aspects of that global network. And I'm going to bring in some subject matter experts who can deep dive into it with me. So, okay, here we go. We're going to get straight into it. I've been listening to the feedback from a lot of people this week, who have wanted to, they've raised concerns. So one of the concerns that I've heard a lot is that, hey, it's not just the Five Eyes. It's not just the Five Eyes who's doing this. I know that very, very well, that it's not just the Five Eyes. And anybody who's followed my work, my journalistic work, will have seen that I've written about that very fact. And that's why here in the first, hopefully you can all now see my screen. In the very first slide of the presentation I put together tonight, I've got a breakdown of who exactly the eyes are. So there is what's known as the two eyes. The two eyes is the US-UK, which is the original intelligence sharing agreement that the Five Eyes eventually stemmed from. There is also the US and Israel, who have a so-called special relationship. So these are the top level intelligence sharing agreements or relationships above even the Five Eyes. The Five Eyes is relevant to me personally because the Five Eyes involves my home country of New Zealand. So that's why this campaign is named One versus Five Eyes, because my particular grievance is with the intelligence agencies of my home country, who, in cahoots with intelligence agencies from around the world, persecuted their own citizens, including myself. However, there is what's known as the Three Eyes, which is the US, the UK, and Australia. And this is the acronym that they use just for that, that partnership. Then there is the Four Eyes, which is the USA, UK, Australia, and Canada. The Four Eyes was created in the 80s when New Zealand was actually kicked out of the Five Eyes, and the Five Eyes temporarily became the Four Eyes. That was because New Zealand in the 80s took a principled stand around nuclear-powered warships, US nuclear-powered warships, and banned them from New Zealand waters. And New Zealand became, by and large, nuclear-free. But then, of course, there is the Five Eyes. And the Five Eyes acronym is FVEY for Five Eye. And that's the USA, UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. Then there is the Six Eyes, which is the Five Eye countries plus the NATO bloc as a whole. Then there's the Seven Eyes, which is basically the major Western European countries. So you have the Five Eyes, and then you have France, Germany, and Italy. There's the Eight Eyes, which is the aforementioned plus South Korea. There is the Nine Eyes, which is the Five Eyes, it's USA, UK, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, and Spain, known as CFBL-NET. Then there is an alternative Nine Eyes, which is Five Eyes plus France, Denmark, Netherlands, and Norway, which is known as Guardian. There is the 10 Eyes, which is Five Eyes plus NATO, Japan, Singapore, Thailand, and South Korea. And there is the 14 Eyes, which is the Five Eyes plus France, Denmark, Netherlands, Norway, Germany, Spain, Italy, Belgium, and Sweden. And then there is the 43 Eyes, which was basically all of the international forces that were allied with the US military in their various escapades around the world. So I just wanted to cover that up front. No, there isn't a quiz to the person who's asking. And yes, there is a lot of eyes. But the purpose of me showing you that is so that you understand that when I say One versus Five Eyes, or I write about the Five Eyes, it's not that I'm excluding all of the other people who are involved in all of the other intelligence partnerships. It's just that my particular personal interest has been in relation to my home country of New Zealand, which is a member of the Five Eyes. So I just want to make it clear that it's not a deliberate omission on my part. So we're going to be talking a lot about something called the global network. And the global network is what the NSA calls its intelligence empire. And this intelligence empire is probably one of the most unequal partnerships that has ever existed. And this is my attempt to show you a little bit about how it works. So the global network, which is right here, is it has over 100 partner countries. I've labeled the partners vassals because that's what they are. They're countries that have become vassal states to an international military hegemony. And I guess because so many of them are involved in that hegemony, there is a huge amount of pressure on countries to join and to participate in it. Then there are a small number of countries which are prospective partners for the global network, but which are not yet fully there. So the Netherlands would be one interesting example. We know from the Snowden files that the Netherlands intelligence agencies, the NIVD and the AIVD, have been working in cahoots with US intelligence and with the global network, despite having no legislative mandate to do so. The people of the Netherlands voted against the adoption of mass surveillance in a referendum. And yet we see that their spy agencies have been participating in the global network without that public mandate and without the legal framework to do so. So there's some definite grey zone there around countries that technically aren't part of the global network and yet somehow are participating in it anyway. And then there's a very small number of countries which are completely separate from the global network and which are kind of like the last bastions of independence. And those countries they're hated by the global network because of it. And they are considered adversaries and they're active targets of the global network. And that would obviously be countries like Iran, like China, like Russia, like North Korea, etc., etc. So the aim of the global network, without any shadow of a doubt, and you see them talk about this openly in NSA documents, the aim of the global network is total awareness. That's the words that they use. Total awareness of every inch of the globe. They want to own and control and have access to all of the intelligence networks on the face of this planet. They want geospatial control over the entire planet. And they've set up specific agencies, which we'll talk about later in this series, to achieve exactly that. They want total visibility over the entire planet. And they're nearly there. That's the saddest part. They are nearly there. There is a small block of remaining countries that have not yet subjugated themselves to the global network. But the vast majority of this planet already has, including my home country and many of your home countries as well. Before I get any further, I just want to let you know that should this YouTube page go down, and I know there's people watching on many other platforms as well than just on my YouTube account, but should the stream go down, it is also being simulcast on the One versus 5i Facebook page on Facebook Live. It's being simulcast on Periscope at periscope.tv/One versus 5i. And it's also up on DTube under Internet Party account or Joe Mangy account, I think. If you search for One versus 5i on DTube, you'll find it as well. So also keep an eye on social media. I'm hoping that all of you will become our independent citizens media team tonight, and that you will amplify the messages on the One versus 5i social accounts, that you will spread the website link, and that you will take any useful quotes or screenshots of the content that I'm showing tonight and spread it around on social media, because God knows not one mainstream outlet on this planet is going to have the balls to acknowledge that this event is happening or to acknowledge the veracity of any of the content that I'm sharing in it. So back to my little slides here. Oopsie, where are we? Bear with me. So this is my depiction of the global network that I've put together for us. So previously in one of my pieces called The Desecration of New Zealand, I talked a lot about Five Eyes and I talked a lot about the global network, and I described the data sharing arrangements of the global network as being like a tiered wedding cake in reverse. It's like an upside down wedding cake. So, and whoever keeps pinging me on Discord, it'd be really cool if you would stop while I'm on stream. Thank you. So the global network is like the top layer of this reverse wedding cake. It sits at the top and it takes all of the data. It's called a full take collection from the pipe, from the cable. Takes all of the data off all of the layers underneath the top. And then the whole scam that they run is that they then take some of that data and they feed it back to, it's like a trickle down effect. It's like, you know, the big lie of the like economic trickle down effect. This is basically the lie of the data version of that. They tell countries, oh, well, we will give you any information that relates to your country or a terrorist event in your country or blah, 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 if you give us every single thing that you have. So they take everything of everyone and then they select parts of that they're happy to give back to those countries. So not only do they take all of the data from those countries, but also as part of their partnership arrangements, and this is something they also openly talk about in NSA documents, they're not just getting the data, they're also getting access to the networks, the hardware, the systems, and even the satellites of partner countries. So rather than the NSA having to invest money to gain satellite access to the entire planet, instead what they do is they directly access, they have network access to the systems and hardware of the partner countries. For example, in New Zealand, if you closely followed the Kim.com case, when the GCSB, which is New Zealand's NSA, was caught illegally spying on Kim, they gave a date that they said was the day that they realized that they were doing something illegal and they stopped. But the illegal surveillance carried on past that date. And when this was questioned in court, the GCSB said that it wasn't them accessing, it wasn't them using their network to spy on him past that date. That it was in fact because he was an FBI target, it was in fact because he was being targeted by the Americans, and that the Americans were using New Zealand's sensor network to continue to spy on Kim, even after the GCSB supposedly realized it was unlawful and stopped doing it. And in NSA documents, they talk about how they can expand their own resources by using the human and technical resources of partner intelligence agencies as an extension of their own. So they're basically consuming the resources, they're expanding their resources to include the total global intelligence resources of all of the partner countries. So it's an arrangement that is heavily in favour of that top layer of the wedding cake. And it has wholly been constructed for their benefit without any shadow of a doubt. Also, in terms of developers, this hugely increases their capacity for the development of or the expansion of the existing networks and the development of new solutions, as they're known in the industry. Because we have seen time and time again in the documents, NSA is farming out NSA work to GCSB developers or to Australian or Canadian or whoever else, whatever other partner agency. The developers and IT talent from those countries is basically being pimped out to the NSA. And they're being engaged to create ever more controlling and pervasive technical and spying solutions for the benefit of the global network. Okay, so underpinning all of this is a legislation and a policy framework. And that legislation and policy framework is also a total scam, just like the partnership agreements are a total scam. So the genesis of the intelligence sharing arrangements in the modern times are these post 9/11 intelligence sharing agreements. And these are laws that were passed in certainly every Western nation, but in many, many nations around the world in the direct wake of the 9/11 attacks. And just as the intelligence agencies in America underwent a total, they literally called it Transformation 2.0, a transformation program in the wake of 9/11 to enhance their intelligence sharing with each other. They also pressured countries all around the world to increase their intelligence sharing with particularly America, but also with the UK and with other members of the Five Eyes. And as a part of that, sorry, I'm just struggling with my Zoom share. As a part of that, we saw the establishment of fusion centres. Now, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. Fusion centres were originally set up in Afghanistan and Iraq. Fusion centres were war zone enterprises. They were used as a part of supporting military forces and invading forces in the post 9/11 wars. Fusion centres were places that took large data sets from a number of sources, both military and civilian sources, and fused them together to create an enhanced picture for the specific purposes of targeting. And, you know, that's one thing when it's in a war zone, but it's another thing when it comes home to the West, to our own home countries. And that's precisely what we saw happen. So there is now fusion centres all around America. There is also fusion centres, international fusion centres, that are operating transnationally. Those fusion centres have gone beyond just being governmental enterprises or military enterprises. The legislation, the post 9/11 legislation, set up something that they call, a term that they called critical infrastructure. And critical infrastructure is not just what you'd think might be critical infrastructure. You would think that maybe, you know, the White House or governmental buildings or things that the state wholly depends on would be deemed critical infrastructure. But actually what was deemed critical infrastructure was major corporations, in particular banks. Banks were deemed to be critical infrastructure. And using this terminology, the military and the government and the security state were able to pull private corporations under the protection of the security services. And by pulling them into the under the umbrella of the security services, they were then able to both have an argument for accessing the data sets of the private corporations, wholesale access and backdoored access, and also to feed intelligence from the security services to those private corporations. Yeah, banks, exactly, Chris. So what that meant is that private corporations became what's known as customers of the security and intelligence services. And that's something that you see again in the NSA documents, is that they have something called a Customer Information Needs Portal. And this is how customers make information requests from the NSA. And when you look at who those customers are, those customers, and I mean, sure, there's like, the Department of Energy, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of whoever, but there's also non-governmental entities who are the customers of the intelligence agencies. Now, just stop and think about the implications of that for a moment. The implications of private for-profit corporations accessing raw intelligence product from state security agencies, becoming beneficiaries, direct beneficiaries of the intelligence apparatus. This is way beyond like terrorism. This is way beyond security. It's not about security at all. It's about dominance. And it's about creating an in-club, a private for-profit corporate in-club that now has a huge vested interest in shoring up and maintaining the supremacy of the intelligence agencies, because those corporations are direct beneficiaries of it. The intelligence agencies call themselves, time and time again in the documents, they refer to themselves as being a business. And the reason they refer to themselves as being a business is because they bill for their services. And this is something else that very few people realize about the intelligence agencies. The intelligence agencies have two-way economic relationships with their customers and also with their partner agencies. So in the NSA documents that pertain to New Zealand, the NSA was billing the GCSB for services, and the GCSB was billing the NSA for services. We also discovered that the NSA is literally a corporation. So it actually, the National Security Agency owns a corporation, and the corporation is called NSA Corporation. And in their documents, they tell their staff, don't worry if you can't get congressional funding for your project. Don't worry if you can't get a congressional approval for it. You can apply to the NSA Corporation to privately fund your project. So this the NSA Corporation becomes a mechanism, a slush fund, basically, a slush fund for funding projects that otherwise wouldn't pass the sniff test with Congress. So, moving back to our slides. So, after, in the wake of the intelligence sharing agreements, the establishment of the intelligence sharing agreements and the establishment of the fusion centers and private corporations being deemed as critical infrastructure to bring them under the umbrella of the state, we've seen a series of bills that have extended the power and the resources of particularly the Western intelligence agencies. The interesting thing when you study this legislation is that it mirrors each other from country to country to country, and it's spread like a wave around the world. And even though some of the wording might be different, the principles, the general aims of the legislation are always the same, no matter what country it is that it's suggested and it's passed in. And it always is made to sound as if it's about terrorism or it's about money laundering, like this anti-money laundering legislation. But that's always just a mask for what it's really about. And what it's really about is exercising control, exercising and cementing control. So in New Zealand, we saw the 2013 GCSB bill, which retroactively indemnified New Zealand's intelligence agencies for having already for years been illegally spying on their own citizens, which was a direct violation of their charter, their founding charter. And we saw the Australian data retention bill, which also effectively did the same thing, though there was also some other nasty stuff in there. The UK IP bill in the United Kingdom, the USA Freedom Act, and Canada's CSIS and CSE bills, C51 and C59, to extend the powers of both the international and domestic spy agencies of Canada. At their core, the essence of each of these pieces of legislation was exactly the same. And you have to ask yourself, how is it that countries that are so geographically removed from each other are passing legislation to effectively extend the same powers to the security state in each of those countries? And the reason is, well, there's two reasons, but the primary reason is because those countries exist in name only. This transnational intelligence cabal makes its own policy. The governments, the whole political farce in each country is like a sideshow. It's like a reality TV show that happens in tandem while this global network calls the shots about what's really going to happen in each country and deploys those solutions across the globe. We already have a globalist empire. Globalism has already won in the sense of how it is perpetuated through the global network, through the global intelligence network. When the same piece of legislation is getting passed all around the world that is solely to the benefit of the spies, that is telling us that our governments are a mask for what is really going on behind the scenes. And we'll get into the irrelevance of electoral politics a little bit later. But this is certainly dipping the first toe in. Now, in terms of policy, so one of the big questions that I had was, well, who is setting the policy? If it's not the ministers in charge in the various countries and it's not the people, it's not the governed, then who is it? Well, we discovered in the NSA documents that Five Eye policy is determined by, the Five Eye directors. And they have luxury annual meetings at these like ridiculously opulent locations that you would literally have to be a billionaire to ever get anywhere near yourself. And on the public dime, they go and have these insanely expensive luxury retreats, and they sit around and they decide what the rules are going to be, what they want. It's really not even about rules. They don't think of it in those terms. They think of it in terms of what they want. What is going to extend their reach and their control over this planet even more. And then they come to a consensus between themselves. And then they go back to their individual countries and they deploy those solutions. So a big question that I also had in studying the NSA documents is, who specifically is responsible for the policy of the NSA? And here I've got to give a shout out to James Bamford, because in James Bamford's writing, I discovered the answer to that question. And the answer to that question is that the person responsible, the top dog responsible for crafting NSA policy, for what NSA does and what terms it does it under, is the director of the NSA. He is ultimately responsible in the founding charter and the founding documentation from the establishment of the NSA. The person who's responsible for setting the directives for the NSA is the NSA director. Now, what happens when they violate their... Someone's saying that they learned some of this info in Decipher You. Absolutely. For those of you who don't know, Decipher You is a web series. I did about 35 or 36 episodes featuring myself and Elizabeth Leah Voss, and who's also an independent journalist. And we studied the Snowden files live online. We read them and pieced together information from them live online. A lot of this information I'm giving you tonight is from that. A lot of it is from me actually studying the legislation that's available online. Some of it's from electrospaces.net. I should have given you the sourcing already. It is actually in my presentation, and I will make at the bottom it has the sources on each of the slides, and I'll make those slides I'll publish them for you guys later on. So yes, if you've seen Decipher You, you'll be a step ahead on some of the stuff. But what I'm trying to do now is just give you my vision from the totality of all of the study that I've done throughout this decade to come to these conclusions. So my next question, that's what I wanted to say, was that in the NSA files, there was yes, this is the condensed class. Someone just said that's absolutely right. This is the condensed class. This is the big picture of all the tiny little bits that we've learned and put together. In the NSA documents, the NSA discovered that their analysts were doing things that no directive existed for. And they were colouring outside the lines of what was permissible and what they were supposed to be doing. So in a normal and transparent organisation, that would result in some kind of punitive action. They'd be held accountable. Like, this would be a problem that they're doing things that they're not supposed to be doing. Well, in the NSA, it doesn't work like that. In the NSA, nobody ever gets in trouble for anything, ever, ever, ever. And therefore, the director of the NSA simply wrote new policy directives and applied them retroactively to cover the staff and the analysts for the activities that they were participating in. And it was that finding, it was our discovery of that led us to the question of, well, who's actually in charge of NSA policy? And it turns out it was the director. So then our next question was, well, who holds the director accountable? I mean, surely the director of the NSA is actually accountable to someone. And that was where also through James Bamford's investigative journalism, we discovered that there was a mechanism. The mechanism is called the Judicial Review Board. And that sounds like, oh, it must be some judges or, the lawyers, legal infrastructure must do something to oversee the spies. Well, we looked into that, and no, it's got nothing to do with judges. It's got nothing to do with courts. I don't even know why the word judicial is really in there, because it turns out that the Judicial Review Board is the head of each of the military services, so the Joint Chiefs of Staff, plus the director of the CIA, plus the Department of State, and plus the Pentagon. So ultimately, then at that time, it was Secretary Clinton and a bunch of military guys who would be relied upon to hold the NSA in check or hold the NSA to account. And surprise, surprise, it's never happened. They never have been held to account. I'm going to talk a bit more about why that's very, very problematic in a second. But first, I'm just going to cover off the rest of this policy stuff for you. So the Judicial Oversight Board was really the only complaint process, and obviously they're never going to hold the NSA director accountable for anything, which gives the NSA effectively free rein. But then the next question was, well, why is all of this legislation basically a mirror of each other, no matter which country in the world it's being implemented in? And the answer to that came from the IC Watch database, which is the Intelligence Community Watch database, which was published by WikiLeaks. And in the IC Watch database, I discovered that New Zealand's mass surveillance policy, New Zealand's spy policy, was being drafted by US State Department employees. So not only was it being drafted by US State Department employees, legislation for a country on the other side of the planet, but it was being drafted several months in advance of a member of the US Federal Reserve Bank, who happened to be a New Zealander, coming into power as the Prime Minister of New Zealand, which definitely indicated some kind of foresight or foreknowledge on the part of the United States. So what we see is that these State Department policy advisors are ultimately the people who are drafting this legislation, which is then being implemented all around the world. And that's a fact that certainly the people are not aware of. So There are some general themes to this constant string of legislation that's being imposed. In New Zealand, I believe we've had 5 laws now, maybe more if we include actually some of the technology legislation, the tax stuff, maybe 6 or even 7 bills related to domestic and international spy agencies and to ISPs and around data and whatnot across as many years, in a matter of actually only 6 years. We've had 6 or 7 different pieces of legislation come in with different purposes. And the general trends have all been anti-privacy and anti-due process, and some of them are downright freaking scary. And if you've followed my other work, if you've seen my documentary or read my articles, you'll be aware of some of this. So in terms of anti-privacy, we see warrantless data requests. We see the deconstruction of the oversight process or the refinement of it. We see in New Zealand spying for training purposes. They want to actually be able to use surveillance teams against citizens for so-called training purposes. We have had implemented domestic visual surveillance. Domestic visual surveillance is the term that they use, the phrase that they use for planting cameras inside your house and watching you in your house and recording you inside your house. That's the term they've invented to cover it off. Domestic visual surveillance. Literally George Orwell on steroids. And that's what they call it. Domestic visual surveillance. You know, love it. What, war is peace. Domestic visual surveillance is George Orwell. And in New Zealand, they've coupled that with the warrantless aspect. So in New Zealand, they can plant videos inside your house and record and watch you inside your house without a warrant. And then they can take whatever they find or deem to be suspicious from that footage and use it to obtain a warrant in order to continue that domestic visual surveillance on you. They are obviously trying to they're trying to ban encryption around the world. They're also trying to bypass encryption where they can't ban it or to backdoor it. And then backdooring applications or corporate databases or the Googles and Facebooks and Skypes of this world via Prism and whatnot wasn't good enough for them. So they've decided that they wanted to be able to backdoor entire internet service providers. So in New Zealand, what was known as the Telecom Interception Communication Security Bill or Surveillance Bill was passed, which required all ISPs to be either interception capable or interception ready, which meant that they had created a direct pipe to the GCSB. So the New Zealand spy agencies had to have backdoor access to the entire network and databases of every registered internet service provider in the country. So that's where we're going, that's where we're going to. And I think America's been there for a long time in terms of, we know that AT&T and whatnot have for many years now been voluntarily cooperating, voluntarily allowing their networks to be tapped by the spy agencies. While this legislation has mandated it so that all internet service providers are effectively the intelligence agencies. That's what it comes down to. And in the tax legislation in New Zealand, they go so far as to require that one staff member of each ISP is specifically trained in, and then is their job to, they even are given a clearance, a security clearance to be able to do so, to provide services to the intelligence agencies. So if you own an ISP in New Zealand, you are required to have a dedicated staff member whose responsibility it is to service the domestic and international security agencies in spying on your customers and handing their data over at whim and making all of your systems and your network insecure for the benefit of access for the intelligence agencies. So the other side of that coin, that's the anti-privacy stuff, but then the other side of it is that they're also really, really, really anti-due process. So the first thing that we've seen in terms of that in New Zealand is that, or the biggest thing, certainly the biggest thing for me and for me personally, is that they have removed the legal definition of threat to national security. So the reason they've done that is because when they had a legal definition for threat to national security, it meant there was something that they could be held to account against for the circumstances where they deemed someone to be a threat to national security. For example, in January of 2017, the New Zealand police put out an official statement calling the movement against the TPP in New Zealand a threat to national security. I was a co-founder of #TPPA No Way, which is a very famous hashtag that viraled worldwide and ran for a number of years and had many tens of thousands of people involved in it. They deemed us a threat to national security, and 6 months later, they removed the legal definition on the law books in New Zealand of threat to national security. And they instead created a mechanism where it was at the discretion of a government official as to what or who constituted a threat to national security. So there is no legal standard that needs to be met in order to apply that definition. Now, that term, threat to national security, is then used in other legislation, is invoked to justify really serious actions being taken against citizens, up to and including revocation of citizenship, revocation of passports, not to mention all of the full suite of surveillance and spying and targeting by the state. Can be done if you're deemed to be a threat to national security, but now there's nothing on the law books to even tell you what a threat to national security is. It's become a completely arbitrary term that's arbitrarily applied. So if they decide that you're a threat, then you're a threat, regardless of whether or not you actually are a threat. It just now comes down to what they think about you and your activities rather than what your activities actually are. So that's super worrying. But then there's even more worrying stuff going on in the courts. Now, another thing I reported on in an article called You, Me and the GCSB is about the new warrant classes. And the new warrant classes are also part of the TICS legislation in New Zealand, but these warrant classes are another principle that is uniform across the Five Eyes. And what the warrant classes mean is that it used to be that they had to have just cause to target someone, and then that they had to limit that targeting to the individual who they were interested in, to a person of interest. Well, they decided they don't like that because it's too narrow for them. So they decided that what they want to do instead is to be able to target classes of people, or to be able to target large numbers of people, or to be able to target locations instead of people, or to be able to target networks instead of people. So instead of just targeting me, they could target every single person at Occupy Auckland, or they could target every single person who was ever a customer of DreamHost or whatnot. What it is in its essence is it's a general warrant. I'm sure that many of you remember what was one of the original causes of the American Revolution was the use of general warrants. And that is precisely what is being employed here. It's generalized warrants. It's no longer about we have legitimate suspicions about one individual person. It's about classifying people and grouping people, or even like basically creating fishing expeditions whereby they can harvest larger numbers of targets. And the reason for that is because they need more targets. They need more targets. And the reason they need more targets is another topic that we're going to be talking a lot more about. And that is the integration of private surveillance and for-profit and corporate surveillance and corporate intelligence agencies into the global network. So just as we saw with Rumsfeld's total force doctrine, in which he declared that private military companies, contractors, could be indemnified from prosecution and brought under the total force umbrella of the US military so that they could operate in war zones for profit. This is the Cheney era, the Halliburtons and everybody else, the Blackwaters. The same thing has happened in the intelligence industry. I mean, it's sick that there even is a word industry associated with state spying, but there is, the intelligence industry. Exactly the same thing has happened. There is now a profit motive in targeting citizens, in targeting people. And if you can target classes of people and large numbers of targets, you're going to make a lot more money than if you're just targeting small numbers of people and having to pick them out one by one. So what you're going to see is that this phenomenon of people being targeted by the state is going to grow and grow and grow every single year. And eventually it really literally will become everyone. Through mass surveillance, it has already become everyone to a certain extent. The capacity is there for it to become everyone. But eventually we really are headed towards where domestic visual surveillance will be ubiquitous and by default. It will have to be, because the for-profit model demands it. They can't have perpetual growth in this industry unless they can grow to encompass the entire civilian population as their targets before they actually max out. Okay, so last couple of points here in terms of anti-due process legislation that's being implemented across particularly the Western nations. Database reporting. So database reporting is another thing that we found in the NSA documents, which is where rather than a specific piece of information being requested or information on a specific target being requested, instead the NSA just started handing over whole databases of information to their customers. So literally a customer, instead of saying, I want information about Susie Dawson, could say, I want information about Susie Dawson's ISP, and be handed an entire database of raw intelligence, which the customer then could sift through or do whatever the hell they wanted with. And they actually, this is to water down the audit trail, because it's a lot harder to keep a track on. It's a lot harder to provide any meaningful oversight over what a customer is requesting and what a customer is being supplied with if the data set that they're being supplied with is big enough to hide that needle in the haystack. So they're being handed, rather than asking for a needle, they're being handed a haystack. This is basically what it comes down to. Thank you to the people leaving many, many lovely comments in chat. And I'm sorry, I will very soon, I'll get through to some of your questions. The person who's asking about domestic visual surveillance, you can read, actually, a great place to read about that would be the Daily Blog, thedailyblog.co.nz, one word, thedailyblog.co.nz. Just type in there SIS for Security Intelligence Services, SIS, the acronym SIS, and search there, or GCSB. techliberty.org.nz would be another place that has a lot of analysis of the legislation that has been implemented there. certainly I've definitely linked the legislation in my own writing. My New Zealand specific writing can be found at spinbin.co.nz. My international analysis can be found at contraspin.co.nz. My Decipher You findings from the NSA documents are up at decipheryou.com. And you'll certainly learn a lot about this. Anyone who's really, truly interested in this topic and all of these things that I'm discussing, on my YouTube channel, there's a playlist called Decipher You. And it's something like 130 hours of me analyzing the documents, NSA documents. And you can sit in real time and you can see every single discovery I made. Now, I'm going to cover off briefly a number of them today, and we'll get a lot more in depth in the coming weeks. But this series is a bit more holistic than Decipher You. Decipher You is really specific just to NSA. But this series that I'm doing right now, Opening the Five Eyes, Exposing the Spies, is going to go through not just Snowden documents and NSA, but also WikiLeaks documents, also through a lot of open source intelligence, also through fact-finding and information gathering that I've done myself over the last decade, and also from a large number of other credible sources as well. So this is kind of like the next level up from Decipher You, if that makes sense. That's my intention. There are a number of topics that are, in my opinion, of vital importance, but which have not been properly investigated in any place that I can think of. One of those would be the JTRIG files. That's something I'm going to spend a lot more time on. Another would be some of the US military and UK military, actually, intelligence and surveillance and targeting manuals that were published by WikiLeaks in 2007, 2008 that I don't think anybody's ever reported on, let alone covered on YouTube. We'll be going through those almost word for word. We are going to dig really, really deep into the IC Watch database from WikiLeaks and the actual activities of the intelligence contractors and private contractors around the world, the specific programs they're involved in and where they're involved in them in and what they're doing. I definitely want to get into the hacking team stuff as well from WikiLeaks publishing, and have a look at some of the technologies that are being pushed through the wholesaling companies. There are like marketing companies whose job is to just market offensive cybersecurity weapons for use against dissidents and citizens. So we're going to get into some of that as well. I won't go any further into that. I want to stick to the high level Five Eyes stuff tonight, and there's a really, really big topic that it says a lot actually about the why I'm doing this. So there's a number of reasons that I'm doing this, and also the why people should care. Sorry, I've just finished the last slide though, because I do just want to finish that quickly, and that's that the other phenomenon that we're seeing in New Zealand right now, and this is being utilised as we speak against my friend Martin Bradbury, who's the publisher of the Daily Blog and who's a very famous 25-year veteran of New Zealand media. And that's the use of secret courts, secret evidence, and then media bans on reporting. So a lot of you will know about like D notices in the UK, and you know about the FBI national security letters in the United States. Well, we're seeing that same phenomenon now in New Zealand, where media is being banned from covering or reporting on any cases which involve in any obscure way national security, or where national security is being used as a cover to prevent any media coverage or transparency around those cases. In New Zealand now, they introduce secret evidence where only the judges can be given evidence by the prosecution, and the defence has no access. They don't even know what evidence is being supplied. It basically just creates a catch-all for the prosecutors to give whatever manufactured bullshit they want to the judge with total impunity for themselves, and to eviscerate any ability that the defence would have to answer to any of those allegations. And they've gone one step further now in New Zealand, and this also relates to the legislation around revocation of citizenship and revocation of passports. And that's that those hearings where in New Zealand where they are applying to revoke the passports or citizenships of so-called threats to national security are being held without notifying the person whose passport or citizenship is looking to be revoked. So no defence, the defendant is not present, no defence counsel is present, the defence is not notified, the person does not know that their passport or citizenship is being revoked. It is a prosecution-only trial. It is a court where there is only a prosecution and there is no defence, and the defence doesn't even know it's happening. It is not justice or legal process by any means or methods by which we would understand it to even be a justice process. And that's where we're at, ladies and gentlemen. We are at a place where a transnational intelligence cabal supersedes government, supersedes the justice system, supersedes law, where they can remove the very definition of the terminology that they use in law, where they can create arbitrary processes by which they apply it, where they can prosecute you without you even knowing you're being prosecuted, where they can introduce evidence against you that you will never even get to see or know exists, where they can film you inside your house without a warrant and then use it to get a warrant, where they have been retroactively indemnified for their illegal and unlawful activities, where they have a financial profit motive in expanding the number of people that they target. This is where we're at. But there are a few huge elephants in the room that I haven't mentioned, and I want to take it back to the beginning as to why I'm doing this and why people should care about it. First of all, this is a point that's been banging around my head all week and I really want to share with you guys. Why should people care about this? I'm anti-war. I think that's pretty obvious. I think WikiLeaks is anti-war. I think pretty much everybody I respect in this world is anti-war. I think most human beings are anti-war. I don't think there's many people on this planet who actually think it's a good idea to kill millions of people and devastate entire countries. There's only a few greedy psychopaths that seem to think that's a good idea. But there isn't a whole lot of people that I see that are anti-spies or anti-intelligence agencies or anti-intelligence gathering. And so I want to make something really, really clear. If you are anti-war, you must be anti-spies. And the reason for that is because every single bomb that is dropped on any country on this planet is dropped using intelligence agencies' targeting systems and information and data gathered by them. There are NSA staff and personnel on site, on the ground, with the operational military personnel in the war zones, and they are using the same targeting systems. They call them the real-time targeting gateway, is specifically what they were using. And there's a number of databases and networks that they use, but every single bomb dropped or military operation undertaken is enabled by this transnational intelligence cabal. And the targeting that has been brought home to citizens around the world, the targeting of citizens in our home countries around the world, uses that same military targeting process and the same targeting systems against us in our home territory. So our inability to realize the role of the intelligence agencies in the war zones has ultimately resulted in it not just being about them bombing brown people in a foreign country. It is now, our ignorance has led to our own demise and to our own detriment. It's now everywhere. And I would point out that George Bush, I'm old enough to remember him saying the whole world is a battlefield. That in the war on terror, the whole world is the battlefield. And we just thought, oh yeah, this is like overblown politicians, rhetoric, it's just George W. Bush, he says all kinds of shit. But no, they weren't joking. They weren't joking. Their plan was to have the ability to target in real time any person on this planet, regardless of what country they lived in. And that is what they expanded their systems to have the capacity to be able to do. And that is what they have been doing ever since. And every single year, the problem is getting more widespread and it's getting worse. So in New Zealand already, I predicted it years ago. I said, even in my documentary in 2016, I said, eventually they will expand to target all sectors of society. And in the 2018 State Services Commission inquiry in New Zealand, we discovered that the very companies, the very private intelligence contractors that I'd been naming since 2012 as being involved in targeting citizens for political reasons, were not just targeting journalists, which they were, not just targeting political parties, including my own political party, Internet Party. We're not just targeting dissidents or threats to national security. They had been targeting child abuse victims who had pending claims against the government. They had been targeting earthquake insurance claimants. People whose homes had been destroyed in the Christchurch earthquake, who had pending insurance claims against the government, or specifically against a government agency called Southern Response, were being targeted and spied on by private intelligence agencies engaged by government departments and paid for with taxpayer dollars. So this is what I mean. There are a lot of people, oh, well, Susie's an investigative journalist and activist, so of course they target her. Well, how about these people are insurance claimants? Does that mean they should be targeted? Does that mean child abuse survivors should be targeted? At what point do we decide to stop victim blaming and start looking at those who are doing the targeting and not those who are being targeted? Because ultimately this is about the people who are doing the targeting. And the people who are targeting dissidents, activists, journalists, child abuse survivors, and insurance claimants are the same people facilitating the dropping of bombs in Syria, who facilitated the destruction of Iraq, the destruction of Libya, the now 18-year-long fruitless waste of money and lives in Afghanistan. The same people who set their sights on Iran, on Venezuela, on North Korea, the same people who are war shopping for the next country that they can do this to, understand that the intelligence agencies that are targeting regular citizens in their own country are the same intelligence agencies empowering every single bomb that is dropped and every single war, invasion that is waged. They are the same systems, the same technologies, the same agencies, the same contractors, the same funding, the same programs. There is no difference. The only difference is that instead of dropping a bomb on our houses, they are over a protracted period of time hounding us to our deaths. And they're doing it for money. They're doing it for profit, just like wars are fought for profit. Just like the NSA documents openly admit they're in West Africa for oil. They were in Iraq for oil. It's all about the money. So I have come to the conclusion, after years of all of this study and learning everything that I have learned, that those systems have got to go. They have got to go. They have got to be defunded, shut down, got rid of, goodbye, no more. Whether it is by the means that Iowa Jacob Applebaum talked about when he said what we need to do is go to the Utah data storage facility of the NSA and shut off the water, because without water they can't have the cooling systems for the computers that they need to store all of this data that they're stealing from everybody that they're spying on through mass surveillance. Whether it is through a mass movement, whether it's civil disobedience or through a coordinated mass movement, I am not okay. Personally, I am not okay with an international intelligence cabal not only facilitating the murder of millions of people in war zones across the planet, but also targeting an ever-expanding section of society domestically within their own countries. I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with them superseding and watering down and abusing law in the legal process. I'm not okay with them destroying due process and bastardizing the entire judicial system. I'm not okay with them undermining the entire political system and turning it into nothing but a puppet reality TV theater show while they do whatever the hell they want to in the background. I'm not okay with them killing people quickly in wars, and I'm not okay with them killing people slowly domestically in our own countries. And I'm sure as hell not okay with saying nothing about it and pretending that everything's fine and worrying about, what movie I'm going to see this week. I'm not okay with any of that. And if I'm the only person on planet Earth that gives a shit, I'm still going to sit here and say this, because I'm not okay with that. And none of us should be okay with that. And if there's one thing that's really heartening to me, it's actually how many other people I know are not okay with that. So that's what the 1 versus 5i movement is about. It's about two things. It's about me finally, after 7 years, being in a position where I have the evidence I need to personally start suing these assholes for what they did to me in New Zealand. And I have now amazing legal counsel who's prepared to do so. And I've begun this campaign so that I can ask people to donate to back that effort, so that I can draw a line in the sand, at least with the New Zealand agencies, and try and get some accountability. But the more that I get into this campaign, I'm understanding that, as I put in the thread a short time ago, about a week ago, I did an angry rant on Twitter, and I said there has got to be a mass movement to shut down these agencies. Now, some people came back and said, it's not about the intelligence agencies, it's about the people above the intelligence agencies. It's about the fucking elite, whatever, the queen, whoever the hell. Hang on a second. If the elite cabal, whoever the hell above the intelligence agencies, has their information flow cut off, has their data flow cut off, doesn't have the systems in place that allow them to target people and to control society, then it's going to be a hell of a lot more difficult for them to do, isn't it? And I think it is far more achievable to go after defunding these agencies or shutting down these agencies. To me, that's a far more achievable goal than taking on the secret societies that have existed for hundreds of years, or whatever abstract thing that people are suggesting that should be done instead. I feel like defunding these guys, holding them to account, having some kind of citizens' commissions of inquiry, actually holding their feet to the fire, and going after and educating people about these systems and how they're being used. I feel like that is, and those are achievable goals. And so that's where I'm focusing my personal energy. And that's my personal fight that I'm going to continue to wage, and hopefully with a lot of you alongside with me. What else have I got here that I want to talk about? Right. Okay, I have so many topics. I could easily turn any of the topics that I have on my little book here into a whole other show, and I probably will do. The other thing I keep getting asked this week is, why do I do what I do? Like, why am I doing this? Well, it's pretty simple from my perspective, really. So I'm acting on principle primarily because, like I said, I'm not okay with what is being done, and I'm not okay with just sitting around and waiting for the continuation of it and for it to continue to get worse at the pace that it has been getting worse. I mean, think about it. It's only been like really 20 years that we've gone from, the shock and awe to full-on dystopia. Like, it's actually been less than 20 years. And things are not getting better of their own accord. But the other reason I keep getting told, like, oh, you're so brave, you're taking such a big risk. These agencies put me through hell in New Zealand. I tried to talk, I did as much as I could to explain in my 1-hour documentary in 2016 as to what I'd actually been put through. But they consciously and deliberately terrified, and I'd say petrified is actually the right word. They petrified me on a daily basis through myriad means and ways, and they endangered me over and over and over and over again. And the net result of them doing that to me immunized me to it, because you actually can't live in a state of permanent fear. And at a certain point, you no longer have a fair response to the bullies who are doing that to you. It's like every kid who gets bullied and bullied and bullied and bullied, eventually they have that day where they snap. Well, I definitely got to that. It didn't take me that long, really. I got to that and I started thinking, you know what? I don't care if you guys have billions of dollars and I have nothing. I don't care if you guys have tens of thousands of personnel and I have a ragtag team of 6 people in a citizens media team. I am going to fight you tooth and fucking nail, because what you are doing is immoral and unethical and anti-human, and you have no right to do it, no matter how many laws that you write to suit yourselves, no matter how many times you indemnify yourself retroactively, no matter what justification you come up with, no matter how many politicians you bribe or buy, no matter how much technology you develop. You don't have a natural right to any of it. And we do have natural rights as citizens. We do have natural rights as human beings. And that has to count for more than the artificial power that is seized and monopolized by these agencies. And it's going to take us standing up to them and telling them, no, you cannot keep doing this. And, at the end of the day, I'm just one woman, and yes, they can get rid of me one way or another, but the message lives on, the problem lives on, and God knows there's enough other people on this planet to pick up the torch and to keep going. And that's what needs to happen. Every time they take a Julian out, every time they take one of our leaders out, there's got to be more that rise up. One of the serious breakthrough moments for me was what they did to Michael Hastings. I felt compelled to step up even more because of what happened to Michael Hastings. And so I hope that with every one of us who is taken out of the equation, that another 10 rise in our place, and we'll actually step closer to victory by this means. I also wanted to talk tonight about risk. Because risk, there's 2 types of risk. There's a risk that we face as activists and journalists, and there is the risk, the fear-driven risk that these agencies are obsessed with. Because the greatest irony is that for all of their trying to instill fear in other people, these agents are really scared. They're constantly scared. They live in a constant state of fear. They consider what they do to be risk management. And if you've read an article that I wrote called Glenn Greenwald and the Irrelevance of Electoral Politics, I wrote that in 2014 after Glenn had appeared in New Zealand. And in that, I talk about how one of the principles of business is risk management, and how the intelligence agencies view everything that they do in terms of risk management. The risk they think of the risk to themselves, and they're constantly obsessed with minimizing risk. So whereas we as activists and journalists think about overcoming fear and taking risks, we consciously take risks. Like, I consciously take risks all the time because the principle is more important to me than trying to personally stay safe. The spies are the opposite. The spies are absolutely fucking petrified of risk, and everything that they do, their obsession with deniability, their obsession with cover, their obsession with creating legends, manufactured falsehoods, lies, is all about trying to minimize the risk to themselves. So the Julian Assanges of this world set aside any fear of personal risk for principle, and the spies set aside principle to minimize personal risk. That's the fundamental difference, is that those of us who follow this path of investigating what's really going on and then sharing that information with other people are demonstrating courage in doing so because we're overcoming the fear. The spies are cowardly. They can't step up and tell into the live truth. They can't allow themselves to let go of their obsession with risk management and with minimizing risk to themselves. And they use their lies. They use lies. They trade in lies to make themselves feel safe. We trade in truth at the risk of it being dangerous. They trade in lies to try to keep themselves safe. And that's a really interesting dichotomy between genuine truth tellers and genuine whistleblowers and genuine agents of social change, and those who attempt to control us. Those who attempt to control us are coming from a obsession with protecting themselves. And those who are seeking to free humanity from that system of control cast aside concern for themselves and step up to the plate for everybody. Someone says they're missing Julian. I miss Julian all the time. The internet is a shittier place without Julian Assange. I can tell you that right now. It is a shittier place without Julian. This whole world is a shittier place with Julian locked away in Belmarsh. What else did I want to talk to you guys about before I start? I will just sit and engage with you in chat for quite a good hour, because I can see how many of you do want to talk and want to engage about this. But I'm just going to cover off my last little thoughts here that I had written down, things I wanted to discuss with you first. I wanted to talk about, but I think we'll do a whole episode about this, and I kind of got there when I was saying about how the intelligence networks and systems and personnel are inherently involved in every single bomb that is dropped, in every single military operation. And that's that the intelligence systems are a part of what's known as the kill chain. The kill chain is completely dependent upon those systems. The kill chain, I actually want to really get into the kill chain as an entire, I will definitely do an entire show on that, because then we get into the whole Tor, internet freedom, whole bunch of things that are associated just with that. Also, I want to talk about Jake Applebaum's work before he became persona non grata in his massive scandal that was created around him being a known FBI target and actually a known NSA target as well. His Tor bridge was an NSA target. I want to talk about his work because one of the last things that he was working on was the drone kill list from the NSA documents and the kill chain. And understanding that is so important, because that military kill chain directly relates to, and those the specific programs and networks that are used to perpetuate that targeting in war zones is the same processes and networks that are being used now in the Western world and in non-war zones against non-combatants under the guise of national security. So the kill chain is definitely one for another Sunday night. Oversight is another massive target, massive topic because they were a target actually. The Congressional Intelligence Oversight Committee was literally a target of the CIA. The Senate Intelligence Committee became a target of the CIA. We know that Brennan literally turned them into targets and spied on them when he was worried about the release of the CIA torture report. Oversight is either avoided or non-existent. That is uniform across the board, whether it's New Zealand or whether it's USA. And the NSA documents, there is countless references. I go so far as to say there is an actual obsession with avoiding congressional oversight, avoiding constitutional oversight by any means necessary. They use liaison teams. Liaisons are interesting. Liaisons are another consistent theme. They're a method of control across the board. So the NSA has congressional liaison officers who exist basically to create this tiny conduit, this tiny funnel through which information can pass from NSA to Congress or from Congress to NSA. Which allows them to really tightly control that communications channel and to make sure that nothing that they don't want getting through gets through or can come back the other way. It's interesting to me because there's also customer liaison officers that the NSA literally plants inside its customers. So I was talking before about how you have these corporations who are customers of the NSA or non-governmental agencies like the Federal Reserve Bank was one of them. They actually have NSA agents embedded on their premises whose job is to better facilitate the relationship, to be a liaison, better facilitate the relationship between the NSA and the customer. There's also NSA liaison officers with all the partner agencies. So, for example, New Zealand has an NSA liaison officer. And again, it's all about keeping this really tight control over the flow of information both ways and over the relationships. And then that reminds me, even from my background in covering protests in New Zealand, it reminds me of the police liaison officers that used to manifest every time there was a protest of any significance, which were postured as being there to help us, but of course were all about controlling the information flow. So from the highest levels of society to the lowest levels of society, you see these same principles of control, these same mechanisms of control being perpetuated, whether it's as high as Congress or inter-partner relationships between intelligence agencies or relationships between intelligence agencies and customers or relationships between like one of the lower state security apparatuses, the local police, and the citizenry. It's the same principle that's just recycled over and over again. So the other thing that I've discovered in my research is that in terms of oversight is that the Inspector Generals, for example, in New Zealand, the Inspector General of the Intelligence Services, the IGISNZ, has no mandated authority over private intelligence companies or the private contractors, the sector, which makes it completely useless because that just means the intelligence agencies can outsource their dirty work to these companies. And lo and behold, they can't be held to account by the state oversight commissions. Hold on, I'm just going to cough. So yet again, we see that these so-called oversight mechanisms are just completely inept and irrelevant, unable to perform their tasks. They don't have sufficient mechanisms to hold these agencies to account. And ultimately, when these agencies are running roughshod over the court system in the ways that I've already discussed, they're running roughshod over the political system and the democratic system in the ways that we've already discussed. and they are escaping any oversight mechanism, there is only one remaining option, and that is for people to take it upon themselves to organise and to hold them to account. That's it. We know the media is not going to do it. We know the media has been completely infiltrated by these agencies, which is yet another topic for another show. But if the media won't do it, if the political sphere can't do it, if the courts can't do it, and if oversight mechanisms can't do it, it's on you and me, guys. That's it. It's on you and me and all of us. And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, the greatest polluters on this planet are the military. The greatest perpetuators of war on this planet are obviously the militaries. And every single one of these countries that has a partnership agreement with the global network is facing privatization agendas, austerity agendas, widespread cutting of social services, GMO, poisoning of the food chain, theft and or contamination of the water. The infrastructures are privatized and sold off. Local manufacturing is killed. These mass trade deals are implemented to undercut, again, to enhance corporate power and corporate profits, and to undercut everyday people. And the social and economic outcomes for the nations who are partnered with the global network are consistently getting worse, just like they have in New Zealand. The countries who partner with the global network are destroyed. Ultimately, they're socially and economically destroyed. So it's not even that giving them all of our data and letting them mass surveil us and everything is turning some kind of profit. It's not. It's actually putting us in a worse situation than we've ever been in. So subjugation or becoming a vassal state of the global network is not improving the quality of life for anyone. To the contrary, it's destroying our quality of life. And that is yet another reason that we've got to take them on. They are bleeding their own countries dry that are members of the global network. Okay, I think I've covered off everything that I wanted to talk about tonight. Where are we at? 2 hours, not so bad. Okay, I'm going to take a 1 minute break so that I can have a drink. And then I'm going to start going back and reading through the massive number of comments in chat. If you have a specific question that you want to ask me, please can you tag me at Susie3D in YouTube, and I'll go through all the tags and I'll answer as many questions as I can. I don't have specific actionable solutions beyond the campaign infrastructure that I've already set up. It is important, but I will do in the coming months, because it is clearer and clearer and clearer to me every day that somebody's got to fight this fight. These people are the people who have been going after WikiLeaks, who have jailed Julian Assange, who have destroyed Jacob Applebaum's life, who have perpetuated the deaths of millions of people in war zones, who have, and this actually just reminds me, I didn't even get onto social control yet. I didn't even get onto the subversion of technology, of education, of economic security, and everything else. I will get there, believe me. I know that was actually what I was intending to talk about tonight, was to go through how every sector of human society has been systematically undermined by these agencies. We will absolutely get there, because there is mountains of evidence of it. Those of you who've seen Decipher You will have seen a lot of that for yourself already, but we'll get there. Okay, I'm going to take 1 minute. Tag me in my and give me any questions that you want answered. Navigator 1N, do I look scared? Do I look like I'm crying? No. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. So please don't bother tagging me if you don't have an actual question for me. And those who do, go for it. Ask everything you want. And I'll be back in 60 seconds. Okay, everybody, thank you for bearing with me through that. Now, I'm just going to say, I am really, really bad at even remembering to call for donations or to tell people how they can help me in my situation. I get so involved in trying to share with you the information that I found that I totally forget to do it. But if you go to #1vs5i.com, 1versus5i.com, or at 1versus5i on Twitter or Facebook, you will find links where you can donate to my campaign to hold these intelligence agencies to account for the illegal activities that they have been engaged in against myself and my family and my friends and my fellow activists for a number of years. If you have seen the intro video to the campaign, which is at the top of the website and on my YouTube channel, then you will know that I am currently being represented by one of Julian Assange's lawyers, as an international law expert who has been preparing cases against the agencies who have violated my rights and many other people's rights. And if you would like to contribute to supporting me in my asylum and supporting my claims and my quest for justice, I would very much appreciate you doing so. If you can donate through card via bank card at my Go Get Funding page, which is linked to on the website if you hit the donate button. Or if you know anyone who's involved in cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, there are also Bitcoin addresses on my social media pages for the campaigns, and also on my personal website you can donate to a variety of different cryptocurrency addresses there as well that go back to me. So cryptocurrency actually kept me alive at a time when my bank accounts were being interfered with, my cards were being arbitrarily stopped or cancelled, even my internet banking access was being arbitrarily stopped or cancelled, and my transactions were being interfered with, and my PayPal account was shut down. Cryptocurrency actually did keep me in one piece, and my situation is a pretty amazing proof of concept, actually, for cryptocurrency. So either you can donate via bank card at 1versus5i.com, or if you are a crypto person, you can donate at my addresses, and I would greatly appreciate that. If you can't donate, which many, many people are not in a position to donate, what you can do is just take your time and your effort and your skills and your solidarity and your love and support my campaign by joining our organising platform. We have a Discord that we all collaborate on together and work to advance the campaign on. You can join that at 1versus5i.com/Discord, or reach out to anyone at any of our social media accounts for the campaign and they'll help you to join. And you can work with me directly. I work with people every single day on advancing this campaign. Someone just said you're an absolute case study that Bitcoin can save lives. That is absolutely true, Kimber. That is totally true. Very much so. And I've never had any official sponsorship. I have no commercial relationships with anyone. I've had no NGO support. The mainstream won't touch me because of they are scared. They're scared to tell these truths that I tell. They're scared to cover these topics. So it comes down to word of mouth. It comes down to people power. It comes down to us reaching out to people and educating people and sharing the content with people one-on-one, because the mainstream networks are never, ever going to support this. I'm the first Kiwi journalist that has ever applied for asylum in Russia. You'd think that's newsworthy. Not one single mainstream publication has reported on that outside of the 2017 Internet Party campaign, when they were forced to some degree, though they still didn't cover it very much. I was totally vindicated by the 2018 State Services Commission report in December of last year. No mainstream media in New Zealand or anywhere else have acknowledged the fact that I was vindicated by that. So word of mouth is all we've got, and each other all we've got to try to drive some awareness about this. Okay, now I'm just going to have a little look back through the chat and try and answer some questions. I'll go back as far as my buffer will allow. Someone says everyone is being targeted. You're absolutely right that everyone is being targeted. That by the very nature of mass surveillance, everybody is being targeted. And that really is what they're trying to do, is to create a never-ending pool from which they can assign targets. There's been reporting that 3 million people or something were already on the terrorism watch list, the so-called watch list. They want to have the ability to target as many people as they possibly can, to expand their private intelligence cabal infinitely. Someone asked, will New Zealand ever be allowed to be non-aligned or sovereign, or to set its own economic model and to leave the Five Eyes? Well, I have a bit of hope. I have hope for New Zealand. I don't have hope because of its political direction at all. I don't have hope for its military or security services at all, because all of the aforementioned are totally subjugated to this international intelligence cabal. But I have hope socially because particularly my generation of New Zealanders, we grew up believing that we were a sovereign state. We grew up having stuck it to the US, having left the Five Eyes, having taken a principled stand and a brave stand. And my belief is if we left it once, we've probably got the best chance of any of the Five Eyes nations of actually extricating ourselves again. The GCSB movement, which I was integral to in New Zealand in 2013, was a mass movement. Towns and cities all over New Zealand marched against that bill. We put humongous pressure to try and stop that bill passing, and ultimately we missed by only one vote in Parliament. I do think that New Zealand is ripe for a fight back against these agencies, and to fight for the restoration of sovereignty in New Zealand. I don't know that this is exactly the right political moment in it, because New Zealanders have been pretty heavily propagandized around the current government. The great lie that's been perpetuated worldwide that we have this wonderful, progressive, feel-good, transparent government and everything's going to be fine and great. I mean, that's a government that got into power having promised not to pass the TPP and passed the TPP straight away. Even spearheaded the passage of the TPP straight away. But a lot of people have fed into the propaganda around the current government. It may take some years before New Zealand is again in a place where it is ready to take seriously a fight back against the intelligence agencies. But I think it's doable. I think it's in the hearts of the New Zealand people to want that. They don't want American bases, secret intelligence bases on US soil, as was revealed by Snowden, to exist already in New Zealand. They don't want to be a part of the global war machine. So I have a lot of hope for New Zealand. I don't see it happening this year, but there definitely is a chance. Sal says, in Sydney, they will be installing cameras on all roads to spy on people while they're driving to ensure that they're not using mobile phones. They also propose facial recognition to use on public transport. Now, that's really interesting, Sal, because facial recognition technology was being used in New Zealand and Australia years before it was announced that it was going to be used. And this is another trend that we see, which is that the technology is developed and deployed before there is a legislative framework for it. So a lot of this stuff that I was talking about being introduced in legislation was actually already being done. Right, and that includes even the revocation of passports and of citizenships. So we know that Tony Fullman, a pro-democracy activist in New Zealand, had his passport revoked well before the government tabled legislation to revoke the passports of so-called threats to national security. Mass surveillance was being perpetrated long before legislation was tabled to retroactively immunise from it. The legislative efforts of the intelligence cabal tend to be belated. They actually just do what the hell they want to do, and then they kind of try and clean it up after the fact. And certainly that's definitely the case with facial recognition, because I was investigating facial recognition technology in New Zealand, and it was being used in the transport systems before the announcements that it was going to be. So I'd take it with a grain of salt. When you hear these so-called announcements that they're going to do this or going to do that, they tend to already be doing it. The transport systems of the Western world are the spy hubs. They're the nervous system of the intelligence gathering. Anywhere there's public transport, the highways, the motorways, the license plate readers, a lot of things that they say are about statistics are not about statistics at all. They're about intelligence gathering and about control. Those intelligence systems interface with the public safety boards of the local councils. A lot of things are done under the guise that relate to surveillance are done under the guise of being about public safety. They have nothing to do with public safety whatsoever. They are about controlling the public, about surveilling and controlling the public. And also that same interrelationships between the public safety boards, local government, the councils of mayors, the transport systems, and the intelligence systems, the surveillance surveillance apparatus. The same system is, just like I said before, the legislation is like carbon copies around the world. The control systems are also carbon copies. A lot of very nice messages. Thank you, people. I really do appreciate it. People are asking about coming to Russia. Russia is not a be-all end-all solution to people who are in a situation that's like mine. I mean, one thing to bear in mind is that I've been here for over 3 years. I still haven't achieved asylum. If I'm very lucky this time around, I will, because there's the evidence of my persecution is beyond contention now and into overwhelming, especially in the wake of the State Services Commission report and many other factors. So I'm hopeful that I will actually achieve it now. But I wouldn't recommend a years-long battle for asylum to anyone. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. Your best bet if you're a target and you need to get the hell out of where you are is to just migrate via normal channels to another country. I mean, that's what I tried to do in Germany. In Germany, I actually got residency in Germany. I attempted to use normal channels and set up a normal life, but unfortunately, I discovered that I was as vulnerable in Germany as I was in New Zealand, almost as vulnerable in Germany as I was in New Zealand. Certainly, many of the same targeting practices were being applied to me in Germany, and life was being made unlivable for me in Germany by the same people who had been making life unlivable for me in New Zealand. Applying for asylum is not something I ever envisioned that I would do. One of the big misnomers about my situation is that people think that I left New Zealand wanting to apply for asylum. I did not have any thought of applying for asylum when I left New Zealand. I was just trying to find somewhere that I could live safely and normally and go through the normal migration processes. It was a combination of factors in 2016 that led to me needing to apply for asylum. And I went through absolutely every other option I possibly could long before it dawned on me that I had no other option than to apply for asylum. And that was because I ended up in a situation where it was simply too dangerous for me I couldn't risk traveling because I couldn't risk my passport being revoked while I was in transit, especially alone with children. It was literally a risk an intolerable risk. And it was the convergence of a number of factors, including the particulars of responses from the intelligence agencies to my information requests about whether I myself was a target, along with one of my movements having been deemed a threat to national security, along with legislation being tabled to revoke the passports and citizenships of New Zealand citizens, along with other revelations from the Snowden files which were being made at the same time, which pertained to me. And the combination of all those factors and the fact that I had been severely targeted in other countries that I'd recently been through were why I took legal advice about my situation. And I was told flat out, do not take the risk of traveling, stay and apply for asylum. And like I said, it's been more than 3 years and I still haven't yet been able to achieve that. So I actually wouldn't recommend it to anybody. You will not. It's a myth that Russia will just welcome you with open arms because you're from the West or from a country that they have conflict with of some type. It's a total myth. So I would say find a nice, friendly, non-NATO country that you can just legally migrate to. That would be my best advice to anybody who seriously is needing to get out of this situation. Were my parents anti-war? If so, I may have been targeted for life well before the 9/11 technological espionage campaign. I'm aware that absolutely that there are people who are targeted intergenerationally. There's a very famous case in New Zealand of Keith Locke, who's an ex-Green MP, ex-member of Parliament for years. He was targeted as an 8-year-old child because his parents were associated with the Communist Party in New Zealand. I work very closely with another activist who I won't name, who also is an intergenerational target because of her family's affiliation with the Communist Party. We know there are people in Hollywood who were intergenerationally targeted because of their family's association with, whether it was even a real association or an imagined association with the Communist Party. And that's just one example. The answer is no, my parents aren't activists. My family aren't activists. My dad was a union rep. That's about the closest association with any type of activism that existed in my family. And that's why I was such a late comer to it. I held activism-friendly political views, but I didn't even really know what activism was. And when I first became, it's funny to me to even say became an activist because it was never a conscious decision for me. When people started describing me as an activist, I was puzzled. I was like, why are you calling me that? Like, I'm not an activist. I'm just trying to help people. And then I was like, oh, that's what an activist is. An activist is someone who spends their time trying to fix things and make things better and help people. And that it took that realization for me to start to accept the term. But initially I was like, I didn't choose this. I didn't like wake up and decide to be an activist. So it took a while for that to really grow on me. Can we get help from countries who are not part of the transnational cabal? If so, how? They have invested. Oops. In answer to that question, I don't think that there is any country which is going to be our savior. To be honest with you, I think that historically, social victories have come from mass movements of the people, and really not from any other source. It takes people being aware, educated, determined, and focused, and solution-focused, solution-minded. I don't know anything else that works, historically speaking. So I would say no. I mean, sure. I mean, you say there are some countries that have a vested interest in the downfall of the cabal. Absolutely. Like those countries that are feeling the heat between either having to choose subjugation to the global network or being active targets of the global network, understand on a larger scale targets going through the same thing as individuals who have to make that decision. I mean, as individuals, we have to choose, will we become subjugated by and complicit in the activities of the global network, or will we stand and fight against it? Will we resist it? And those who choose to just ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist are in fact complicit with and serving it, effectively serving it anyway by default. But I don't think that the solution is appealing to a nation state, no matter who that nation state is. I think the solution is appealing to each other as individuals and working together to try and do something about it. Someone's asking what will happen to Julian Assange as we get closer to 2020, US election. His treatment is evidence or proof of Trump's sketchiness. Trump is not as powerful as they want us to believe. Trump has over 13,000 results in WikiLeaks database for his name and his activities if you search it. It's one of the greatest myths that's been circulated about WikiLeaks is that they never published anything about Donald Trump. They published a ton of stuff about Donald Trump. So he will be as unhappy with them as anyone who has been exposed by WikiLeaks. No administration of any, in particular Fiver's country, but many other countries on the planet, is ever going to like Julian. Even if WikiLeaks releases were to their benefit in one aspect or another, they're also to their detriment in another aspect. And that's the beauty of the blanket transparency that WikiLeaks provided. What's the famous quote? You know, in the end, it won't be the actions of my enemies, but the silence of my friends. That's what I see right now. It's the what's hurting Julian the most is the silence of those who should be his friend, and the silence of those who should be using their platforms. I would say should be furiously using their platforms to advocate to save his life. I personally feel I'm constantly consciously aware of the degree to which I owe my platform to WikiLeaks and to Julian, because Julian is someone who uplifts people, individuals. He will take individuals who he believes do good work or who he believes are significant or have a significant contribution to make, and he takes his giant platform and he lifts up those people and he gives them a profile and he gives them support. And he's done that for years. And there are many, 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 many journalists, activists, and public figures who owe their followings, who owe their platforms to WikiLeaks and to Julian. And too many times, I have seen people who have directly benefited from the visibility that Julian and WikiLeaks gave them, from the protection that Julian and WikiLeaks gave them, being burned, either directly, overtly, being burned via smear or via drama or via whatever, or burning Julian and WikiLeaks through silence. I've seen that happen time and time and time again. I've seen so many people burn them that way. And I've always been determined that I will respect what WikiLeaks did to me. I mean, WikiLeaks more than 15 times publicly shared my work just from WikiLeaks platforms, not including Christine Assange and other amazing associated people who have relentlessly promoted me. They have been loyal to me. They have respected my work, upheld my work. Julian was a fan of my work. Julian was working with me and assisting me in aspects of my work. And I will never forget that, ever. And I will never, ever turn my back on them. WikiLeaks saved lives. Julian saved lives. Julian took at-risk journalists and at-risk whistleblowers and did every goddamn thing he could to try and help them. And he does not get the respect or the recognition for that he deserves. So I will always, to the end of time, scream for his freedom. We need him. That's the bottom line. We need him. This world, like I said, however long ago, this world is a shittier place when Julian Assange is not at liberty. And it's a shittier place without WikiLeaks being able to actively publish. Okay, Katie Christian, that's a great question. What do you think the percentages of information collection that occurs between the spy agencies and big tech, or how does that relationship work? Well, I would say the percentage is 100% in terms of big tech funneling their data to the spy agencies. And how does the relationship work? I think that the big tech companies are basically proxies for the intelligence services. That's how I would describe them. I think that in the NSA documents, they talk about specific NGOs and educational programs and facilities that they work with as being a recruitment pool, existing as a recruitment pool for the NSA. They dress it up as if the NSA is providing some benefit to the institution, but actually the NSA is subverting the institution to become a recruiting pool for the agency. I think that the relationship with big tech is very much like that. I think that big tech is a data pool for the NSA. I think that big tech is able to do a lot of the NSA's work for them, and the NSA is able to reap the benefits of it and harvest the fruits of it. And I think it is a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours relationship. Tech companies hate compliance because compliance has costs. Tech companies don't want compliance costs, so they're far happier to have their databases or their networks backdoored by the intelligence agencies. They're far happier to hand over the intelligence agencies backdoor access and say, take what you want, which has very little compliance cost for them. And in some cases, they can even be paid for that service by the intelligence agencies. They're far happier for that than to have to comply with regulation. I mean, that's what they hate more than anything. So I think that the relationship between big tech and intelligence agencies is that intelligence agencies are a leech. They're a data leech that leeches from big tech. And I think that big tech is subordinate to the intelligence agencies and will comply with them to keep their costs as minimal as possible, keep their overhead as minimal as possible. Hope, in my opinion, it will take young people to really get the movement going. Have you had contact with many university students? Hope, this is something that will have to happen over the course of the coming months, is that there will have to be a concerted outreach effort, absolutely to universities, also to friendly, maybe not NGOs specifically, but there are certain religious groups that are pretty awake and different social groups that are pretty awake, and that would be that these messages would resonate with. I need a ton of help with outreach because I literally I'm already stretched to the max just doing what I do on a daily basis. So I need as many hands and pure hearts and willing minds as possible who are willing to take our content and our messaging and to engage in outreach as far and wide as possible to build those relationships and build those networks on behalf of the campaign. So if you're someone who's willing to do that, then please get in the Discord. The Discord is not somewhere where you'll be like instructed what to do. You won't be handheld, and I think this is something that people don't realize. In the Discord, everything we do is on a volunteer basis. So it's about having the drive and taking the initiative to say, hey, I can do this. Is this cool? And us going, yeah, that's a great idea. That's awesome. We can give you this, this, and this to help you, these graphics and this flyer and this whatever. We'll set you up an email address, whatever, and away you go. And then you're getting on and doing it. And that's what it's going to take, is a lot of people taking a lot of initiative if we're really going to do something about this. Because I love working with people, and I'm responsive and I'll discuss things with you, but I can't sit there and like handhold every single person, everything they do. So we need people with that inner drive themselves and that have the genuine want enough to do something about these problems, that they're willing to take whatever tools and skills and resources they've got and to run with it. Someone says they never knew there was a suggestion or movement to shut down the NSA data center, and now the whole bogus Area 51 run makes sense. That's a really good point, actually. If you're interested in that, I would go and look up Sarah Harrison and Jacob Applebaum. Maybe one of the social media admins will be kind enough to find the link for you and circulate it. Summer of something it was called. I'll have a quick look on YouTube and see if I can find it for you. It's a long talk that was done in Berlin between Jacob Applebaum and Sarah Harrison, and they talked pretty extensively. Jacob talked pretty extensively about this topic, about what we need. Oh, it's called After the Summer of Snowden. Sarah Harrison and Jacob Applebaum, After the Summer of Snowden. If you look up that video and watch it, it's a really educational watch. It's an hour and a half, and it's definitely worth your time. I would also watch Laura Poitras and Jacob Applebaum's lecture where they talked about kill list and the NSA data center. Let's have a quick look here. I definitely linked to it in Being Julian Assange. Actually, that's where you'll find this one that I'm talking about. If you go to the section that talks about Laura Poitras and Jacob Applebaum in my article Being Julian Assange on contraspin.co.nz, you will see an embedded video that they did, and that was when they were talking about the drone kill list and about the Utah data facility and about engaging in civil disobedience related to that. Jennifer says, what about that guy Fitzgibbon? It seems like they're still after him, the Intel folks. Look, they're after anybody who's effective. So everybody who worked with WikiLeaks who was effective is targeted, smeared, undermined, destabilized, sabotaged. So you see that with Jake Applebaum, you see that with Trevor. Trevor Fitzgibbon was the media guy who handled the entire thing around Snowden coming out in 2013. Now, if that doesn't make you a target, nothing will. He was the one on the phone with 600, 800 journalists from around the world organising PR about Snowden. He was the one putting certain people who shall remain nameless on major cable news network shows to talk about and promote and defend Snowden. That's only one tiny aspect of what he did. He was also the person managing the Chelsea Manning campaign for years and years, like 2010 to 2015 kind of time range. He was doing press and PR for Venezuela, for Ecuador, and he was anti-Hillary Clinton. And if you look into the people who took down Trevor Fitzgibbon, you will find direct ties to the I'm With Her campaign. You will find direct ties to people like David Brock and Media Matters. You don't have to look very far to find the truth about the people who've been smeared. And you don't have to look very far to find out why they were smeared. And, you know, it's pretty transparent and obvious if you put in any time or research into this stuff. The thing is that the smear agents rely on social pressure. So they rely on guilt by association and social pressure. So you've got to be the type of person that isn't scared to take an opinion that's contrary to whatever is being publicly pushed or whatever seems to be socially acceptable. You have to be willing to speak the truth because it's the truth, and not speak what everybody else is saying because then you get social credit for saying the same thing as everyone else. You've got to be willing to be that black sheep, you know. You've got to be willing to be the person who maybe looks strange for saying something different than what others believe. You have to care about the truth more than you care about kudos from your peers. And eventually your peers will catch up with you. That's what I've learned. Can I give some examples of interference or intimidation that led me to leave New Zealand? Okay, so in New Zealand, excuse me, guys, for the frog in my throat. In New Zealand, I faced a continuously escalating campaign because that's how it works. It's like they start off small and then they like double down and they double down and they double down and they double down. So in 2011, I was just getting followed around all of the time by strange vehicles. And then my house was getting broken into and the police were like acting kind of strangely about it. Like they're like fingerprinting in the wrong place and whatnot. Like my bathroom window had been broken from inside the house, not outside the house. Etc. So then, by 2012, then I had like crazy stalker people taking photos of my house and my car and information about my kids and publishing it all over the internet and publishing lies about me and smears about me. And then the police wouldn't do anything to protect my kids, all right, literally telling me to my face, this is going to keep happening to you because you're an activist. Then I started getting like nails and like road spikes like hammered into my car tires and piercing my car tires right through to the core. So I had to like replace the entire tires on both sides and rebalance them. And this is happening like over and over again. I had overt intimidation, overt interference. I was being stalked in vehicles, on foot, photographed everywhere I went. Like literally people with like long lens, like professional cameras would be like in a car park behind my friend's restaurant photographing me, or just anywhere that I went. I was just being stalked constantly. I had repetitive, petty, but expensive to fix damage to my house over and over and over and over again. They'd stick holes in my roof so my roof would leak, and then I'd get it fixed and they'd come and rip the patches off so it would leak again, and I'd get it fixed again and they'd come and rip the patches off, and on and on and on and on. It took until 2014 to the height of the general election campaign, which was an extremely politically contentious time in New Zealand, where a lot of terrifying things were happening to a number of people, actually. That's when I started like having the oil cap removed from my car, which made my car engine catch on fire when I was traveling through a high speed zone. I had vehicles boxing me in on the road. They call it like highway games, trying to control my speed and fuck with me. That was at Greenpeace Oil Free Seas rally. Actually, I had that happen. And then a much more serious one where, again, I was boxed in and they actually tried to drive me off the road. That was one of the final straws for me when that happened. I had just everything that you can think of, constant death threats, social media death threats, email death threats, crank phone calls, prowlers on my property, interference in all my relationships, private investigators going around every single neighbor in my street making crazy allegations about me, interference in just every possible aspect of my life that you can imagine. And that's what ultimately pushed me over the edge, because I just realized that it's impossible to live like that. You can't live like that. And there was no mechanism of the state in New Zealand that was willing to protect me in any way, shape, or form. In fact, they were aiding in the endangerment of myself and my children, and they were providing cover to those who were doing it. And so I had no choice but to leave. And that's what it came down to. Victrola 13, what can we do most effectively right now to move the truth forward? I would say step one would be tell the truth and spread it. I mean, at the moment, there's too few. There's it's like there's an awareness process, right? Like Occupy took concepts and pushed them to the mainstream and to mainstream awareness that weren't mainstream before Occupy. And 1 versus 5i will have to do the same thing in terms of understanding that the intelligence agencies, it's not just like that they're passively spying on us. It's not just that they're seeing our text messages or we need to download an app or change some browser settings. Like that stuff's good and necessary, like those basic self-protection steps, but the intelligence agencies are doing a shitload more to us than just passively spying on us. Like they are actively controlling every facet of human society and of our lives. And they have got a stated, it's not even in contention, they have got a stated aim of total control of this entire planet, literally. And not only do they have that stated aim, but they've nearly achieved it. They are goddamn close to achieving it. People need to know that. They need to learn that. They need to hear those messages. And like I said, that's going to have to come from the grassroots. It's going to have to come from word of mouth. It's going to have to come from us. It's not going to come from frickin' CNN. The only way it's going to get covered by mainstream media is when they have no choice but to cover it, because everybody is screaming at them about it. The only time that mainstream media will cover issues like this is when their credibility is at stake, and they would literally put their own profit models in danger by refusing to cover it. You have to force media coverage by self-education of the public. It's the same way that we've done it with every mass movement in New Zealand. We had to fight, push 8 to 12 months full-time before we could break things, get things to a point where mainstream media is forced to cover it. It'll be the same thing with this movement. It will be, I mean, we're like, 3 weeks in or something since I started it? It's going to take us 8 to 12 months to get to that point, but we absolutely can do it. So in terms of most effectively, what you can do, I mean, the fastest thing that we can do is raise the 30 grand that we need to file the first leg of lawsuits, because when filing papers against these agencies does actually trigger mainstream media reporting. So that's one method. There's that basic goal of literally asking people to support a fight back directly against the agencies in a forum that greatly discomforts them, because they do not want discovery. I can tell you that right now. They do not want to have to be handing over documents to my lawyers. And conversely, if they don't hand over documents and if they try and seal all under national security, then the very fact that they've done that is going to give the game away for them, because they can't simultaneously say she's crazy, she wasn't targeted, and we're sealing it under national security, can they? So this lawsuit is going to discomfort them greatly for that reason. So, I mean, that's a basic tactical thing, is that in running these streams and raising awareness, that we ask people to support the fundamental aims of the initial aims of the One versus 5i campaign. But more broadly, what we need people to do is to study up on this content and to understand the full ramifications of, and the full scale, the true scale and nature of the problem. And to commit themselves to trying to do even just a little bit. We don't need people to give their entire lives. We don't need them to have to end up in asylum or have to come to Russia. We just need them to contribute one skill every now and then, or make one $50 donation, or just do something. If everybody just does something, then it adds up to a whole lot. So what we really need is advocates. We need people who are willing to advocate that to as many people as possible, as many people as they're able. Someone else is asking, do I have a GoFundMe page? No, I don't. I only have a Go Get Funding page, which is basically the same thing. And that's available on oneversus5i.com. Someone's asking if I know about people who are familiar with FOIA. There are services that you can file FOIA requests through. So that's what I would suggest you do, WDPK 837. Bill Hogan, does the intelligence community direct and control who gets banned from big tech or banking, etc.? If you're talking about blacklisting, actually, there's really interesting revelation that's come out through the course of the Spy Cops, Spy Cops drama in the UK, which has been a campaign to achieve transparency about the use of undercover spies by the Metropolitan Police in London. And one of the things that they managed to unearth is that there was a private company that was offering effectively blacklisting services, where they were creating like a shit list or shit lists for the intelligence agencies, and then signing on corporations to their services, and then blacklisting people across industries and across entire financial sectors because they were dissidents or politically active, or for one reason or another the state didn't like them. So it's, yet again, it's an example of political discrimination being industrialized. And just as it is through the targeting by private contractors and private intelligence companies, these blacklisting services, blacklisting companies are very much engaged in that. Now, the model seems to replicate itself across all the countries, so it's not beyond imagining that there are corporate blacklisting services that exist in other countries than the UK. So I would say that's probably the means by which that's being done. Victrola 13, Susie, what crowdsource investigation do you need done right now? Well, that's a great question. And I think that what I will do is compile a list of massive documents, some of which I was looking at today, which I definitely can't get through all of myself. And we can absolutely do some crowdsourced investigations into what is in those documents. I'm thinking about some of the intelligence targeting manuals that I discovered today that have been sitting in WikiLeaks for 11 years and nobody's ever written about them. Those things are hundreds of pages. So stick with these Sunday night sessions, and together we'll get into some of that stuff. Someone says, what is the best way to advocate for Julian's freedom? I would say by whatever means you possibly can, as often as you can, and as loud as you can. Some of the most effective means that I'm aware of are things like printing out bookmarks with information about Julian's situation, going to libraries and like hiding the bookmarks inside the books in the libraries. Think up really subversive but legal and beautiful ways, writing #FreeJulian on your banknotes and spending them. there are many, many ways that you can take direct action that are totally legal and totally socially acceptable and might even put a smile on someone's face. And you don't know how wide-reaching or how far-reaching the effects of that are. But they're actually very far-reaching, I can tell you from experience. Even getting a piece of chalk and just everywhere you go writing like hashtag Free Julian, people are like, huh, Free Julian? And they stick it in their phone, and then next thing you know, they're reading articles and sharing memes and everything else. You can raise a lot of awareness by like really basic memes. Really, I mean, go to WikiLeaks and just buy a WikiLeaks t-shirt and walk around wearing it. That alone helps. Okay, everyone, I think I'm going to wrap it now because I'm running out of voice. Sorry, I know there's a lot more questions there. Okay. Danimations is asking me about the manuals I just mentioned. Danimations, I would go to @Jaraparilla on Twitter, @JARAPARILLA, and start reading his book that he's writing and releasing the draft chapters one by one online. It's called The Truth About WikiLeaks. It is the most spot-on historical reporting about WikiLeaks that I've ever seen, I would say. Short of writings by Julian himself, Jared Perilla's book is absolutely up there. And one of the things it's doing is a chronological retelling of the history of WikiLeaks from someone who actually was observing right through all the way along. And what Jared Perilla writes about the 2007, 2006 through 2009 period, which is what he's covered so far, is absolutely packed full of releases that your average WikiLeaks supporter and probably every journalist on planet Earth doesn't even realize are there. And some of those manuals that I'm talking about are there. You just clicking on Jared Perilla's links in that book will keep you going for weeks. And the information is all very, very pertinent to this campaign. One of the things Julian once said to me, he's like, and you write about intelligence agencies. And it's, how do I explain? I don't really want to give the whole context of the conversation, but he was intrigued by my work because my work focuses on the intelligence agencies, and because Julian, more than anybody else probably on this planet, understands the full ramifications of the activities of those agencies. And so the very factor that my work was focused directly upon them was intriguing to him and was a big reason why he shared my work and supported my work. The intelligence agencies are, in my personal opinion, they are the key to undoing vast amounts of the damage that's being done to this planet. Vast amounts of it, because so many aspects of the global control system simply could not function without the agencies. And I think the fact that there hasn't been a widespread movement of any description against the spies that I can think of is precisely because it's at Jared Perilla. I'll write, sorry to those who are asking, I'll write it in chat right now on YouTube. At Jared Perilla, the truth. It's like the truth about WikiLeaks or the true story of WikiLeaks. I think it might be the true story of WikiLeaks. It won't be too hard to find it on his timeline. It's by far the best source of reporting about WikiLeaks, short of Julian himself. But yeah, where was I? I think the reason that that no real movement to oppose these agencies has existed recently, anyway, is a combination of people seeing them or of them projecting supremacy and being untouchable, which is, I'm sorry, but that's Wizard of Oz stuff, and it can be dispelled. That myth can be dispelled. But also because part of the control structure that is employed against us is about controlling and directing our attention. And when we get into studying the JTRIG documents together, you'll understand that how much time and effort and resources they have spent on exactly that, controlling and directing the attention of human society. They want you to care about who Justin Bieber is dating, or some superfluous bullshit, or what sports team is beating what sports team. They do not want you studying the culpability of the intelligence agencies in the destruction of planet Earth. So it's going to be on us to teach that, because you're not going to learn it in school, you're not going to hear it on CNN, and you're not going to see it on MTV. Okay, I think that's enough for tonight. If you want to support me, please visit number1versus5i.com. Please share this stream. Please share this information. I promise that next week I'm going to get into the specific methods and the evidence of the intelligence agencies actively subverting all of the pillars of society, from education to economics to environment to technology. Technology is a huge one that they're obsessed with controlling, and really getting into going after the pillars of social control, and how they are subverted and wielded against us. And then each week I'm going to have a theme going forward for the Sunday, and I'll start bringing on some super knowledgeable people who can lay down even more information that will contextualize for you why this movement is so important and why we need to build it into something lasting and with its own momentum and inertia, so that we can push it forward and actually achieve some change. Okay, thank you to all the people saying thank you to me. Thank you to you for being here. Thank you for making it so that I'm not just screaming into the wind. I deeply appreciate it. And I will see you next Sunday. I will put out a campaign update somewhere like middle of the week. And love to Graham Elwood as well, because Graham Elwood actually allowed us to simulcast this stream tonight to his YouTube channel too, which gave us a reach of another 50,000 subscribers. So thank you so much. And if you want to chat to me, you can chat to me on the Discord or tweet at me on Twitter. If you want to help my wonderful social media volunteers, go and retweet everything on the @1versus5i timeline, or go and like all the Facebook posts or whatever. Thank you for being brave enough to be here and for caring about this issue. And I'll see you next Sunday night.
Hi, my name is Susie. I'm an activist and a journalist from Auckland, New Zealand. For years, I've worked on controversial issues like the corruption of our intelligence agencies. I was severely targeted as a result of my work. This led to my articles being amplified by the world's most accomplished publisher. In 2016, I made a documentary about how and why I was forced to leave my country. I have now sought refuge in Russia, and my situation has become public.
On 882 6PR, the voice of Perth.
It's 12:30 right now, and Tony with you, and I'm really happy we finally got through to Moscow to my friend over there, Susie Dawson.
You're listening to a 95BFM podcast.
Susie Dawson is a Kiwi activist and journalist who worked as a member of Occupy Auckland's media team at that time. Now, 5 years later and following involvement in GCSB and TPPA opposition, she's seeking asylum in Russia, alleging she has been spied on, harassed and threatened by the police.
Welcome back to The Wire. Now, finally on the show today, last week it was announced that Susie Dawson will be the new leader of the Internet Party.
Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. We have a special guest with us. It's Susie Dawson. She's an activist, journalist, former party leader, and current president of the Internet Party.
Susie Dawson, an activist and citizen journalist currently seeking asylum in Moscow. Susie has written extensively on surveillance and the deep state and claims it's not safe for her in New Zealand.
My name is Craig Tuck. I'm a lawyer from New Zealand. I act in the area of international human rights. I act for Susie Dawson, along with a group of other lawyers throughout the world who act for journalists and dissenters in high-profile cases, including the case of Julian Assange. As far back as 2012, Susie has been trying to warn New Zealanders and other citizens around the world about state targeting and surveillance of citizens and the methods being used to do it.
Surveillance in New Zealand is now so widespread, it's not an issue of police going and getting a warrant and doing an investigation and then it all coming out in court. The vast majority of the surveillance that's undertaken is never going to be aired in a courtroom. And by that I'm talking about cell phone technologies. I'm talking about lawful interception is the term that the companies that do this like to use. There is a corporation in Wellington, New Zealand called SSI Corp. And you can Google them and you can look at their website. And on their website, they're so good as to explain at length exactly what they do and how legal it is for them to do it. And essentially, they can intercept virtually any communication. If they have someone at range, they can hear your actual conversations, but also through cell phones, they can essentially turn them into microphones and hear any conversation that's had within the vicinity. They can see your text messages, they can see what photos are on your phone, they can see what files are on your phone, they can read your emails, they can just intercept all kinds of information.
Any intelligence service in the world that has significant funding and a real technological research team can own that phone the minute it connects to their network. As soon as you turn it on, it can be theirs. They can turn it into a microphone, they can take pictures from it, they can take the data off of it. But it's important to understand that these things are typically done on a targeted basis.
Not only was Susie essentially blowing a whistle on state-level spying, she was naming the precise entities that years later it would be proven had in fact been doing it.
And the fact that these are private corporations that are doing it should be really concerning to us. The crowd that they outsourced it to was TCIL, which was, I believe, Thompson & Clark Investigations Limited. The state is contracting a private company to surveil you. To me, that's really immoral, absolutely immoral.
Some 6 years later, in December 2018, an official State Services Commission report confirmed that New Zealand government agencies had been employing Thompson & Clark Investigations Limited to target New Zealand citizens. This is a private company that had essentially been instructed by state agencies and departments to spy on citizens.
More than a dozen police staff are under investigation for passing sensitive information to the private investigators Thompson & Clark.
Thompson & Clark. Security firm Thompson & Clark.
Thompson & Clark.
Thompson & Clark.
So Thompson & Clark, aren't some of them old police officers?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so does that explain the relationship and the free flow of information? Doesn't it actually seem a bit crass?
Well, at the end of the day, I guess what I trust is people's intent.
The report identifies perhaps inappropriately close relationships, morning teas paid for by Thompson & Clark, invitations to go out for drinks. Were there other companies identified where you inappropriately gave them information, or just Thompson & Clark?
There are a myriad of security companies who inquire of police every day. For instance, insurance security.
But that's not my question. People listening to this will think, hey, Thompson and Clark were getting stellar, top shelf, gold star treatment from the police. Why? Do you treat other security firms the same as you were treating this one? How do you seriously think it looks to members of the public listening to this?
Thompson and Clark hasn't just been paid by the government to spy on Greenpeace and earthquake claimants in Christchurch. Tonight, Checkpoint can reveal the controversial security firm has been also monitoring the activities of another 3 activist groups in Northland, Coromandel and Wellington, and the activities of at least 1 further claimant.
Susie has been involved at the very highest levels, with people facing charges from prosecutions coming out of the Eastern District Court of Virginia in the United States. There are more prosecutions to follow of currently unnamed persons. Importantly, information will be coming out in the months to come that will provide transparency and clarity and lead to accountability. Suppression and prosecution of dissenters can't be allowed in New Zealand or elsewhere. That's why Susie's team is launching the hashtag 1versus5i campaign, and with your help can achieve some important victories for democracy and for each and every one of us.